The president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, has succumbed to the pressure exerted over the last few days through mounting protests and international pressure. Lukashenko now says that he will be willing to share power and make changes to the country's constitution. He said work is already underway on possible changes which can be made to the constitution. But the leader also made it clear that he is not prepared to make any far-reaching changes to the constitution while being under pressure from the protesters. Now, this change in the country's stance coming at a time when the opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya came out with a video message saying that she is ready to lead the country.
Я готова принять на себя ответственность и выступить в этот период в качестве национального лидера. С тем, чтобы страна успокоилась, вошла в нормальный ритм. Чтобы мы освободили всех политзаключенных и в кратчайшие сроки подготовили законодательную базу и условия для организации новых президентских выборов. Реальных, честных и прозрачных выборов, которые будут безоговорочно принятым мировым сообществом.
The opposition the leader had already fled to Lithuania amid the crackdown on the election protests, calling for the creation of a legal mechanism to ensure fair presidential elections. Tikhanovskaya said it was essential to make the most of the momentum generated by the protests so far.
Я готова принять на себя ответственность и выступить в этот период в качестве национального лидера. С тем, чтобы страна успокоилась, вошла в нормальный ритм. Чтобы мы освободили всех политзаключенных и в кратчайшие сроки подготовили законодательную базу и условия для организации новых президентских выборов. Реальных, честных и прозрачных выборов, которые будут безоговорочно принятым мировым сообществом.
Fresh protests took place in Belarus today, just a day after the country witnessed its biggest protests over the weekend. Demonstrators gathered right outside several factories and the headquarters of the state television in Minsk, following a call from the Belarusian opposition for a general strike. Yesterday, anti-government rallies began near the Victory Park in the capital, with crowds carrying flags and banners marching towards the Independence Square. These mass protests dwarfed a pro-government rally led by President Lukashenko. The rival rallies took place after Russia agreed to provide security assistance in the case of external military threats to the country. Meanwhile, the European Union has also taken note of the political unrest in Belarus. Member states have decided to hold an emergency summit on the 18th of August to discuss the crisis. The EU has launched the process of imposing sanctions on the officials in Belarus who have been accused of the electoral fraud. Germany, a prominent member of the European grouping, has threatened wide-ranging sanctions against Belarus. The UK, meanwhile, has said that it does not recognize the results of the Belarus presidential elections. The UK also called for an independent investigation into the disputed results. In a statement, the UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said, and I'm quoting, "The world has watched with horror the violence used by the authorities in Belarus to suppress the peaceful protests that followed this fraudulent presidential election. The UK does not accept the results," unquote. And earlier we spoke to our correspondent Julia Chapman for the latest from Moscow. Take a listen in.
That's right. There certainly is a division on the stance when it comes to Belarus in the international community. Immediately after the election result was announced a week ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin congratulated Alexander Lukashenko on his victory. The Central Election Committee of Belarus gave him more than 80% of the vote, and it was a result that was recognized here in Russia. But since then, the Kremlin has been watching events unfold over the past week at an extraordinary rate. They did not see this coming, these widespread protests in Belarus, the violence that was meted out against protesters earlier in the week, and then the masses of people who have gathered on the streets of Minsk later in the week when they were allowed to do so and not blocked by the police, culminating in yesterday's protest, which was the biggest in Belarus's modern history, with more than 200,000 people estimated to be in attendance. Now, Alexander Lukashenko appears to be increasingly rattled, and he has been calling on support from the Kremlin. He phoned Vladimir Putin twice over the weekend to try to call for help, essentially. And the Kremlin says that Russia has offered all the necessary assistance to Belarus, including under the CSTO military alliance. That's a group of post-Soviet countries that have agreed to defend each other in the face of foreign aggression. And although Lukashenko claims that there is a threat from abroad, he says that NATO is building up troops along the Belarusian western border. NATO has denied that, and it's not clear whether Russia really has an appetite for any intervention. They may see Alexander Lukashenko as increasingly looking untenable in his position.
And the UK has called for an independent investigation into the disputed election results. Our correspondent Benji Hire getting us the latest from London.
Yes, it's a huge development in Belarus that he said he would share power, but I think the attitude from a lot of Western nations, including the UK, where I am, has pretty much been the same. Full-on condemnation, rejecting the outcome of the result, and also rejecting the violence that we've seen in order to try to quash those protests that have really increased in number and passion over the last couple of days since the election. The statement from Dominic Raab, pretty stern, pretty clear and to the point. As you mentioned before, he has condemned the election as rigged, and also says that he's watched with horror at some of the scenes played out in central Minsk. So the attitude from the UK is that they still want this to be resolved, as do the rest of the European Union. The Foreign Secretary's remarks follow similar sentiments from the bloc, who have said that they do not trust the outcome or legitimacy of the vote, in which Mr. Lukashenko on August 9th declared victory convincingly against his opponent, who's now fled to Lithuania. And a lot of the developments we're now seeing are for further calls for sanctions, for actually punishments which will hold the Belarusian authorities to account. So Mr. Lukashenko may very well try to turn around and say that he wants to share power, but I think the UK and indeed many other Western partners want to see potentially another rerun of that election, some legitimacy, some proper foundation of democracy, which of course President Lukashenko and the Belarusian government have outright refused to do. So there is this clear standoff between the UK, the EU versus Belarus, who have not, of course, not part of the European Union, who have aligned themselves instead to Russia. What happens next is anyone's guess, really. It's a very turbulent time in Belarus. Things are changing all the time.